So I'm sorry if the end of the last section was truncated. I was going to put it all in one because it's one chapter. So far, I've been doing one chapter per recording, but that was already 45 minutes, and Vedanta is really important. So I decided to put it in part 2 of chapter 8 because we're going to be looking at Vedanta Sutras, and we're going to be reading the Gita, which later on at the end of the semester, which is sort of part of the Vedanta tradition, and a lot of modern Hinduism, and also exported Hinduism, the Hinduism that we encounter in our East-West bookstores, and and in yoga culture in the West, tends to be sort of a certain form of neo-Vedanta, a certain sort of modern form of Vedanta. So let's consider then the origins of Vedanta. Okay, and we were saying, I think, I was just saying in the previous segment that the Vedantins then are interested in the Upanishads, and the Upanishads, another name for the Upanishads in the Upanishads themselves is Vedanta. Remember, anta meaning the end of the Veda. So you can either think of it as the chronological end. It could either denote that, right? Because of course, the Vedantins would not think of chronology. Remember, the Vedas are eternal. There's no chronology. Not that they were later, and the Vedas are older and the Upanishads are later. You don't think that way if you're traditional, either Mimamsa or Vedantin. But so the Vedantins would probably prefer to think of the word Vedanta as the end of the Vedas in the sense of the highest ultimate truth of the Vedas. And we get a debate right in the beginning of Vedanta Sutra 111, Atta, Tato Brahma Jignasa. Atta, now we're ready, now we can inquire into Brahman. And then the commentators say, now, what does now mean? Now means reference to something else. The very first word of the Vedanta Sutra, now. And then there's a discussion. Does now mean, okay, now that you've done your rituals, now you've done all of that, you did your rituals and you try to get the good things of life and you became frustrated and realized it's a waste of time because you're just getting old, you're going to die. Now you may be ready to sort of inquire into something deeper than just the perpetuation of this universe. What is it? What is the agent? Who is the agent of sacrifice? Does the agent just do ritual and go to a celestial realm and then get reborn again and do more ritual and go up to another celestial realm, come back? Is that it? Or and then the sort of notion that life is actually suffering or frustrating. Embodiment is inconvenient. We have these bodies and they're clunky and they're clumsy. They get old, they get sick, they get injured. The notion that, we don't want to perpetuate, life as we know it. We seek some higher truth. So that all of these kinds of this kind of thinking emerges in the Upanishads. So Vedanta then, the atato, the first word, there's a discussion amongst the commentators. Do we need to first do ritual and then, after frustration from the ritual, or at least dissatisfaction with the fruits of the ritual that don't really satisfy, the good things of life don't really satisfy, and even if we go to the celestial realm, we have to be reborn again? Is that really all there is eternally? Or is there a way of freeing the seer? So the atato then, do we first need to do rituals and then pursue truth? Or can we just go straight for truth? And Shankara then takes the position, the first commentator we're going to look at, Shankaracharya. No, you don't need to do rituals. Just go, if you're smart, right from youth, you can go straight into the pursuit of knowledge. And Ramanuja, a later commentator, might say, no, it's true that, the pursuit of truth is the highest, but, to be interested in truth, you first have to be frustrated with material life. And therefore, the rituals, for those so therefore we should do these rituals and engage in perpetuating material activities in order to realize how hollow and shallow they are. So first we have to go through that, and then we can come to the pursuit of knowledge. So there's a difference about whether rituals should be just discarded right from the get-go, or whether they have a place ultimately in terms of creating dissatisfaction with embodied life. Okay, so that's the Vedanta relationship with Mimamsa. They consider themselves as pursuing a higher truth. Whether or not they think you first have to go through a lower truth to get to the higher truth, that's a secondary discussion. Our Vedantins are going to be interested in Brahman. There's lots of stuff in the Upanishads. We'll be reading them the next lecture I'll be recording will be Upanishads. And we're going to be focusing on the aspects of the Upanishads of interest to Vedanta. And for Vedantins, the whole purpose of the Upanishads is to teach about Brahman, the ultimate truth. Atato Brahma Jignasu Janmadhyasya Yataha. We're actually going to be reading these sutras later in the semester. Right? I'm just rattling out the Sanskrit. Don't worry. By the way, don't freak out. When I quote verses, don't think you have to catch them. It's just my mode of teaching. It's nice for you to hear it. I'm not expecting you to record it or in any way understand. It's just, isn't it nice though, to actually hear the sounds of instead of just the English translation, which is filtered through English language. It's if I remember a verse and I happen to know it, I'm going to share it with you. But of course, I don't expect you to have a clue what I'm saying. Just listen to it and hopefully appreciate it. It's a beautiful language. So first sutra, Atato Brahma Jignasu, right? We're going to talk about Brahman, the first verse, and we know what sutras are. I think we've discussed that, right? Very, very minimalistic verses that encapsulate a tradition's teachings. And then what is this Brahman Sutra number 2? Janmadhyasya Yataha. It is that from which this creation and maintenance and dissolution of the universe emerges. It is the source, the absolute truth, the cause of everything, and it's intelligent. Ikshater, verse Sutra number 5. Okay, so therefore the whole, so that's Vedanta. Vedanta is accepting and trying to understand what is this Brahman. All accept that it's eternal, it is Sat, it is Chit, it's conscious, it's intelligent. And then they will also add, it's blissful to experience Brahman is ultimate bliss, trillions of times greater than any human bliss. And then there's Atman, new Upanishads. So now we have, okay, what is the relationship between this Atman and Brahman? In some passages of the Upanishads, they're the same thing. They're even interchangeable. Sometimes you can speak of Brahman in the individual embodied being. Sometimes you can speak of Atman as the cosmic whole. But normally, Brahman is going to be the term used for the cosmic whole and Atman for the individual. But the question is, what's the relationship between Atman? They're both Satchit Ananda. They're both eternal, conscious entities. Are they one and the same? Or are they distinct in some way? Okay, and this, along with other questions, is going to divide the Vedanta traditions. This school, more than any other, is a school where there's major, massive differences between Vedanta sub-schools. Okay? So we have the Upanishads, then we have someone called Badarayana comes along and writes the Vedanta Sutra. He writes a sutra that sets out to systematize the teachings of the Upanishads and to demonstrate that all of the teachings of the Upanishads are ultimately about Brahman. And that's his project. And we have a course on Vedanta Sutra. If you're interested in it, it's been recorded. You can actually access the entire course. Wait till later in the semester to see if you're interested in that. When we actually read the first 4 sutras. We're only going to read the first 4 sutras of the text. So Badarayana writes the Vedanta Sutra. Why? Because the Upanishads are unsystematic. And a sutra writer, what's the project, what's the dharma, what's the duty of a sutra writer? Is to write a exposition in the form of minimalistic little verses called sutras, clarifying and systematizing a body of text, right? Mimamsas did it for the Brahmanas and the Vedas because they want to systematize ritual activity. That was their motive. Vedanta wants to do it for the Upanishads, and they want to do it they want to argue that really, because lots of stuff in the Upanishads, there's debates, there's kings, there's kingdoms. There's even a book written by one scholar saying, these Vedantins got it wrong. They think that it's all about Brahman, but really it's about rivalry between kingdoms and these Brahmins that are debating about Brahman. What they're doing is really it's a power struggle between kingdoms. So that would be what I said before, a Marxist interpretation. That really that religion is a fiction and really it's all about power. Okay, that was Marx, and remember he would be an atheist and he doesn't accept the soul. So therefore, for him, if there's no God and no soul, then what's religion then? Well, it's just a human construct. All right, we obviously don't need to subscribe to that view. You should be aware of it at least. And Marx can provide some insights that religion can be co-opted, under rubrics of power. It can be co-opted by individuals or communities in order to assert power over others. We can't deny that in human history. But that's, that would be more of a historian's way of looking at religion. We're looking at it philosophically. But just so you'll be aware, when people talk about what is a Marxist, a critique of religion or a Marxist interpretation, you run into this sometimes. A Marxist, that's what a Marxist interpretation is. The assumption is it's all made up. There's no spiritual truth behind it, and therefore, if it's made up, who made it up or why? What kind of agenda is being enacted in that construction? All right. So just so you know, okay. So Vedantins, right? So therefore, Badarayana writes the Vedanta Sutra, and he's writing it to systematize and to show. There's 750 sutras, 4 chapters, 740. I can't remember the exact number. 4 chapters, all basically connected with the Brahman, the Atman, and then second chapter might be refutation of other schools. So there's a lot there, but the essential, announced in the first verse, Atato Brahma Jignasu. This text is going to be an exposition on Brahman. Okay, so he writes the sutras, but the sutras are so minimalistic you can't understand. They're 2-3 words, and this then. And you have to, and you don't know which Upanishadic section it's referring to, because every sutra is referring to some passage in the Upanishads, and then attempting to clarify it, and contextualize it within this quest for knowledge of Brahman. But the sutras are so. Badarayana doesn't tell us. He writes a sutra. He doesn't tell us which verse in the Upanishads he's referring to. So therefore, we have to have commentaries. Okay. Now, the commentaries, fine. They are going to write commentaries both on the Upanishads and on the Vedanta Sutras. And they write pages and pages and pages, perfectly clear, perfectly systematic. We have immediately can understand what they're saying. But now another problem emerges. The commentators completely disagree about what both the Vedanta Sutras and the Upanishads, what are they really teaching? With regards to some certain issues such as the relationship of Atman and Brahman. Are they one? Do they merge like a drop of water in the ocean? Or are they eternally separate? Is Brahman personal God, Narayana, Vishnu, or impersonal? Is the world real? Is it false? And these are major issues of contention. They're not just trivial little details, right? In the Mimamsa commentaries, Kumarila and, may disagree with, there were 2 major exegetes of Mimamsa. I just had to check the name. It's Prabhakara. So there were 2 main exegetes of the Mimamsa Sutra, which was written by Jaimini. You don't have to know these words, these names. And they disagree, but not. So in the Mimamsa, 2 different commentaries or main commentaries, there's disagreement, but not massive, great big disagreement on major ontological issues such as, is the world real or is it not real? Is the soul one with Brahman, or is Brahman personal or impersonal? Not on that kind of level. Vedanta, you really do have these differences. So you cannot speak of Vedanta as a school. It's a very important thing to acknowledge. The Vedanta gets divided. People tend to think of Vedanta as Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, which we're going to talk about now. But actually Advaita Vedanta is only one school. Okay, but let's start with Advaita, because although there were many Vedantins before the great Shankara is the founder of the Advaita Vedanta tradition. Okay, Shankara, Acharya just means teacher, 8th to 9th century, and there were many before that. We know that from the names given in the Vedanta Sutras. There's even names in the Upanishads of various teachers. So if anything they would have been teachers. Either their teachings were oral, or if anything was written down, it was not preserved. So the first literary commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, as well as the Upanishads, is by Shankara. Shankara then writes a commentary on the main Upanishads, and then on each verse of the 750-odd verses, sutras of the Vedanta. Briefly, for Shankara, the world is an illusion. It doesn't exist. It's a superimposition, and we'll be encountering the language that he uses for this. the world is vivarta. There appears to be a transformation from Brahman into the things of this world, right? If Brahman is the source of everything, well, the world with all its forms, right? Forms, he likes the term names and forms, right? Because if there's forms like tables and chairs and trees, right? If things emerge, rocks and mountains and planets and oceans, those are forms. So if they have forms, you can name them. So he talks about name, the whole realm of name and forms, meaning perceivable reality, illusion, mirage, doesn't exist. There's only Brahman. There only ever has been, ever will be, and we, the perceiver, we're real. Perception is real, but actually we're really non-different from Brahman. And when we think of ourselves as different, like I think I'm sitting here talking to you, and you sitting there listening to me as if I'm an individual, a conscious being. You're another conscious. You're all other conscious beings, and we're all somehow different. What makes us different is these bodies and minds, which are illusions. Once you take away the illusion, then my Atman, your Atman, and the ultimate Atman, actually, it's just one. It always has been one. There never has been any differentiation between us. Right? So they're completely opposite to Nyaya and Vaisheshika, where there are real things, there's real atoms and qualities and the seven substances. Shankaracharya, Advaita means no duality. Dva, like the English word dual. So dva, it's a Sanskrit word, it's a cognate, goes back to Indo-European. Remember, Indo-European languages are connected. That's an example. Dva is cognate with duo or two, twa. In English, TWO, tuo, dwe. And means not dual. There's no duality. There's no, duality means, okay, this is a tree and that's a plant. They're different. And it's a table and it's a chair. They're dual. They're two different things. All duality like that, which means all names and all forms, and then names because we name them, but really forms. All forms are just appearances. They're not real. And so then what is real? Brahman. So is this like Buddhism? No. Buddhism accepts the reality of the external world, but just considers it to be momentary, interdependent, and ever-reducible flow. And they do not accept an eternal self. The self is also momentary. There is consciousness. They're not materialists, remember. The consciousness is different from matter. In that sense, they're not materialists. But consciousness is also momentary and interdependent. Whereas for Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, no. Brahman is eternal, autonomous, not dependent on anything. In fact, there is no other thing. There's only Brahman. And we are, and we'll talk more about this. So, you hang in there. Because, it's just the first round. It's the first round, and I'm throwing all, she's throwing all this stuff at us in the intro book to get an overview. But then when we go into each school, we'll be sort of, trying to excavate it a little bit deeper. And then, see, the advantage of doing it this way, having an intro, is you get the first sort of layer of information and probably getting all confused and muddled up and trying to keep all the schools distinct, which one said what. But at least it's in there. And then when we go into each school, at least you'll have a first layer of samskaras. Samskaras are imprints, memory imprints. You'll have your first layer, and then when we encounter each tradition in it, we'll be spending a week or 2 weeks going a little bit deeper. At least you won't be starting off with a blank slate. You'll be like, oh, I remember that. Yes, okay, that. Yeah. All right, so don't freak out if this is all fast and furious, and if it's all a bit overwhelming. Remember, I suppose you worry about quizzes, and naturally your students, you have to get grades. You'll be getting a review sheet, and we don't make it hard. We're not out to catch people out or anything like that. We just, the basic, you'll have a review sheet with vocab list. I think, partly one's already been given to you. So you don't have to worry about the quizzes if you've done your reading and if you've been listening to the lectures. You'll have no problem. But if you haven't, then that's a choice you make. Okay, so back to Shankara. So Shankara is the person, all right, a South Indian Brahmin. His name is Shankara. And the name of his philosophy is Advaita Vedanta, right? Because he follows Vedanta. He's interested in the Upanishads. That's what it means to be a Vedantin. A Vedantin is a follower of Vedanta. So in means to follow something or possess something. So we're going to find yoga later on in the semester, and the yogin is the one who does it, and the yoga is the practice, and the one who does it is yogin. So Vedanta is the is a body of knowledge, and the one who does it or practices it is the Vedantin. And the ladies are Vedantinis, or yoginis. That's the feminine ending, ini. So Shankara then posits that, and he gives an example. You know, we know there are mirages. Like you go in the desert, sometimes people get dehydrated, and then they project a mirage. They see water, a body of water, and they think, oh, there's an oasis over there with palm trees and water. It's not real. It's a mental projection. So he uses that example of projecting something where it isn't. Really, there's just sand. So we're projecting this whole, and there's no we actually even doing the projecting. So his opponents are going to pick holes in this, but let's let him speak. We're not going to look at the debates yet. We're going to do that when we get to the Vedanta, right? We're not going to look at the disagreements. We're just going to present each. We're looking at two of the Vedantas from two different sides of the fence. So for now, why do we see this world of forms, and then we give names to the forms? Shankara would sort of overlap with the Buddhists, right? When we give names, we're creating a fiction that there are real things out there, tables and chairs and trees. Of course, his fiction is different than the Buddhist fiction, his idea of what the fiction is. For him, it's a total mirage. Buddhists don't say it's a mirage. They just say it's momentary, interdependent, and a flow. But there's a real flow. There's a reality out there. They don't say it's a mirage. So it's not the same thing as Shankara, right? There's overlap. And people accuse Shankara of being a crypto-Buddhist for various reasons that perhaps we'll run into later on. But for now, a mirage. And again, the snake rope example that I just mentioned, another classic Shankara metaphor. We think there is a snake, but really it's a rope. What have we done? We projected snakeness, snakehood. We projected the notion of a snake onto something which is something else, just a rope. And then what happens when we realize it's just a rope? Then we see it for what it is. So what happens when we become enlightened in the Advaita Vedanta? We cease seeing first of all, we see the whole world as Brahman, including ourselves. There is no more seer, perceiving a scene. Everything is just infinite, eternal, Satchidananda, blissful, pure consciousness. And that's the goal of it's a soteriological, remember that term? Soteriology, striving for liberation. It's a soteriological tradition. Okay? So let's see if she gives us a couple of verses from the Upanishads. We'll be reading them next lecture, but let's have a quick peek. Bottom of 125. These are the kinds of passages that Shankara will draw upon to support. Remember, they're Vedantins. So everything they say, and what authority are they saying it? What's their justification? What's their pramana? Remember pramana. Pramana means source of knowledge. How do you know something? Well, I know something because pramana, I see it, so I know it to be true. Number one, pramana is a means of knowledge. In some schools, there's also the actual knowledge itself. So how do I know that something is true or real? So far we've spoken about three sources primarily, although schools will differ. I know something because I see it. Number one, I know something because I infer that if there's smoke over there, there must be a fire. I know there's a fire. How do I know it? I make an inference. Number three, words. I know it because I heard it. Okay, in mundane life, we hear things all the time. So that's one. So that applies to mundane life as well. But in issues such as the Atman, things that are not perceivable, although yoga will say they are, we'll get to that later. But for things that beyond conventional perception, how do we know them? For Vedanta, same as Mimamsa, we know them because of the sacred text. They're eternal. So Vedanta shares that with Mimamsa. That's why they're sister schools. They just focus on different texts. Okay. It's okay if I repeat things because, there's a lot of information and pedagogy is repetition. If you repeat things, you hear it 2-3 times, and then it settles a little bit. I mean, I've been studying this stuff for 40 years, and I keep repeating it. Every time I hear it's different, I read it, it's different, and my understanding deepens and deepens and deepens. So the knowledge is like that. Okay, so therefore, the terms important to Shankara: projection. This world is projected. A mirage is projected, right? We're projecting something that's not there. Or we can think of it or, that thing is being covered. So the snake is being covered, the rope is being covered by an illusory snakehood. From the point of view of the perceiver, it's really a rope. But the perceiver thinks it's a snake. So you could think about this. One way of thinking about it is you're projecting snake onto the rope. That's fine, vikshepa. Or you can think avadana. Don't worry about the Sanskrit terms. I'm just throwing them out. Don't be intimidated. I just want you to be as close as possible to the tradition, right? And not just always filtered through what our West, English language and modern ways of thinking. I'm trying to stick as close as we can in an intro course to the source text. So I'll be throwing out these words. Don't worry about it. Have your vocab list. You'll know exactly which words you're responsible for your quiz. All right? So don't fear that. Enjoy. Appreciate the Sanskrit. Appreciate this encounter with what it's all about. It's what education is about. Encountering things we're not familiar with. So think about it. Really a rope. Because it's dark and I take my specs off, I can't see so well. I think it's a snake. Two ways of thinking about that. I'm projecting snakehood or snakeness onto what's really a rope. You can think of it as big shape, as a projection. Another way of thinking about it is that the actual rope has been vivarana, has been covered by an illusory snakeness. So these are the couple of the categories Shankara uses. The notion of reality being covered by that which it is not. Rope is covered by a snake, which it is not, so it's kind of covering. Or we can think of it as a projection of a false notion, an illusory notion projected into where it doesn't belong. I'm projecting snakeness on what is actually a rope. So those are a couple of the terms that we find. Let's read a couple of the Upanishadic passages, bottom of 125. In the beginning, this world was just being. The one only. Shankara likes that. One only, monistic. Without a second. And it thought to itself, let me become many. Let me multiply myself. Chandogya Upanishad. Well, the problem with this is, this could be used either way. Shankara uses it to say in the beginning there were just one. And, but the monotheists are going to say, well, hey, that one is a being. It thought, so it must be a personal being. And it became many, so it's not an illusion. The many are real, but hang on. We haven't spoken about Ramanuja yet, so that won't make much sense to you. But I just want to point out at this early point, a passage like that can be interpreted two different ways. Right? We'll get to the second way in a minute. Right now, for Shankara, it means there's just one. He's interested in the part of that statement that says, in the beginning, this world was just being. That's really what he is interested in. The second part of that doesn't work so well for Shankara. And then, here's another passage from the same Chandogya. By means of just one lump of clay, everything made of clay can be known. Any modification are merely verbal distinctions, names. The reality is just clay. Okay, you get clay. And then you modify it into plates and cups. You make clay plates and clay cups, and you make these things. He's calling the verse is calling them modifications, right? And then we say, then we say this is a cup, a clay cup. But we don't say that. We just say it's a cup, and this is a plate. And we apply verbal modifications. What does he call them? Verbal distinctions. We give them names. Let's call this a cup. Let's call this a plate. But really, what is it? Just clay. Right? So he likes that because he wants to say everything is just Brahman. And all of these names and forms, plants, trees, planets, skies, universes, oceans. Of course, the verse doesn't say they're illusion. Nowhere in the Upanishads does it say it's illusion. For Shankara, he wants to say they're all illusion, and so these names and forms are just superimposition. Now, so the issue all Vedantins have to deal with is this. There are some places in the Upanishads that speak of Atman and Brahman as one, and some where it speaks of them as different, internally individuals. Some places that speak of Brahman as a being, like the passage we just read, actually, it thought. And some places it just speaks of it as an impersonal truth. And there's even a passage in the Upanishads that suggests the world isn't real. But other passages that say it is real. So there seems to be a conflict. Some places this Atman is individual, some places no, it's one with Brahman. Some places God is personal, sometimes impersonal, Brahman. Some places the world is real, some places it's unreal. So An academic scholar will say, well, the Upanishads are written over centuries by different people, and naturally they express different views, and they're all kind of stuck together in this body of text called the Upanishads, and naturally there'll be different points of view. Vedantin can't say that. Why can't a Vedantin say that? Because the Vedas are eternal. They're not written by different people, and therefore they're perfect. So there is no contradictions. So what are you going to do with what appears to be a contradiction? You have to find a way of making it not a contradiction. You have to find a way of systematizing it, and that's what exegesis is, the term exegesis, right? Clarifying a sacred text to give it coherent meaning. So the way Shankara does this is he has this two-tiered reality. Is this ringing a bell? The Buddhists, remember? This conventional reality, the world that we see, of forms and names and objects that seem real, and we seem like a real seer that's seeing a real world, that's conventional. But ultimately, when we get beyond all of this, when we calm, remember Nagarjuna, we calm these sort of verbal, what do you call it, verbal differentiation, or whatever the term was, when we actually purify the mind and see things clearly, what do we see? We see that really reality is a flow of interdependent. There's no autonomous eternal entities at all. There's just this flow. Okay, so there's two levels of reality. Ultimate, which is what it metaphysically ultimately is. Different schools say you can achieve that in different ways. Nagarjuna, by correct thinking, you can attain it. The Yogacara, by purifying the mind. That's a separate issue, how you attain it. But certainly with Nagarjuna, Madhyamika, two tiers of reality. Shankara, it may be the case that Shankara's Param Guru, the guru of his guru, was actually a Buddhist. There's very strong arguments for that, and books have been written about that. So some people think of him as a crypto-Buddhist. Others think of him as someone who was operating in a Buddhist milieu, and he was trying to, Buddhism had become very dominant. He was trying to reinvigorate Vedanta philosophy, and so he borrowed some Buddhist categories to do that because, we'll never know that. But these are, I think convincing arguments can be made along any of these lines. But what is true is he does accept this two-tier reality, Paramarthika and Vyavaharika. Conventional reality, the reality we see, we think there's names and forms, and so when and then ultimate reality, everything is Brahman, and he does, and so he applies this to the Upanishads. Remember that when there appear to be contradictions, Brahman personal, other places impersonal, Atman and Brahman different in some places, merge in other places, become one. World is unreal, maybe in one or two places, but mostly it's real. Contradiction, apparently. How does Shankara resolve it? He says, when Upanishads are speaking in a particular sort of way, that the world is real, the souls are individual, and God is a person, they're speaking in terms of conventional reality. When, however, the Upanishads are speaking from the ultimate reality, from that vantage point, then this applies to those passages of the Upanishads where the Atman merges into Brahman, where the world is unreal and where Brahman is impersonal. And that's how so what does he accomplish now? He's able to say, yes, the texts are perfect. They're not unsystematic. They're not contradictory. They're just different parts of the different texts are speaking on different levels. Some texts are speaking from conventional reality. There's a real world, and there's a God, and we worship God, and there's a real soul. Other parts of the text are talking from ultimate reality. The world isn't real. It's a mirage. There is no soul, right? And the soul is one with Brahman, because look, why am I different from you? Because I'm in my body, and you're in your body. Well, what if the body's a mirage? Now what happens to the I and the me and the you? What's keeping us distinct? If that which seems to be keeping us distinct, this body and this mind, if they're actually illusory, here's an example. Imagine here's a pot, and there's air in the pot, and I'm turning the pot upside down on my hand, right? There's air inside here, and it looks like it's separate from the air outside. Why? Because it's contained in the pot. Well, what happens if the pot was a mirage and was never there in the first place? Now what happened to the air that previously seemed to have been individualized? It's still there, but it's not an individual. It's one with Brahman. And I got coffee all over my fingers. That's a nice example, right? So that's Shankaracharya, Advaita. In the end, there's no air inside or outside. Everything is just Brahman, no names, no forms. Simply unqualified Brahman. What does that mean? No qualities. There's no qualities like Nyaya Vishesha, no atoms, no qualities, no universals. We can talk like that in conventional reality. He'll accept that. He'll accept Nyaya. At least accept Nyaya categories in conventional reality. He'll accept the gunas of Sankhya in conventional reality. But in ultimate reality, it's only Brahman. Okay. So one last point before we move on to Ramanuja. And then why does it appear that there's a world then if it isn't really? Oh, how about we ask that question? Certainly his opponents are going to ask that question. Well, if it's just Brahman, how come I'm seeing the world as tables and chairs and trees and planets then? So Shankara would say Maya, or actually he doesn't use the term Maya. In fact, it is used by later Advaitins. Avidya, ignorance. Because of ignorance, we project this world of names, of forms and names. Just like in the mirage in the desert, because of dehydration and confusion, we project the oasis into the. He likes that example. Or in dreams, we think dreams are real. When we wake up, we realize they weren't. So therefore, this term avidya is very central to understanding why does the world appear to be real and full of forms and distinctions and dualities. Dvaita, when actually it's advaita, when actually ultimately it's really non-dual, there's only Brahman, and none of this is real, it's just a superimposition. He says it's because of avidya. A couple of centuries later, moving on now to Ramanuja. Ramanuja's he's not impressed with Shankara at all. In the beginning of his Vedanta Sutra, a fifth of his entire commentary, like 100 pages of English translation, is simply rebuttal to Shankara. And perhaps one of his main arguments is going to be, wait a minute, you say the world is unreal because of avidya. Well, where is this avidya, ignorance, where is illusion or ignorance located? It can't be in Brahman, because Brahman is by nature infinite blissful awareness and knowledge and consciousness. It can't be outside of Brahman, because then you have a dualism, and Shankara doesn't like any dualism. So he says we can't be outside of Brahman. It can't cover the whole of Brahman, because that's like saying the sun is covered by darkness. That's the nature of the sun is light. It makes no sense. It's incoherent to say darkness covers not from the outside, not like a cloud, but inside. It makes no sense to say that darkness covers the entirety of the sun from within, because the very definition of the sun is that which is luminous, from a visual point of view anyway. Can't say that. And you can't say it covers a part of Brahman and the other part is pure, because that creates parts. Now you've got a division in Brahman, which is duo, dvaita, two. Shankara's advaita. Means a negation, like English, theist, atheist. Is a negation of whatever it's put with. Remember that. We're going to be using it a fair bit. When you put in front of any noun, it negates the noun. So in English we say theist, and then the opposite is an atheist. Likewise, why is it the same? Because it goes back to Indo-European. So dvaita is two, advaita is not two. So Ramanuja is going to be critiquing Shankara and trying to show the major flaws in his argument. No, for him, the world is real, the souls are real, and they're eternal. They never merge. They unite in devotion with Brahman. Why? Because Brahman is a personal being. God. Closer to a Christian understanding. A personal being, and the soul is an individual, and the ultimate goal of liberation, Shankara's ultimate goal, is like the raindrop hits the ocean, becomes one with the ocean, just becomes one with Brahman. It always was one, but to ultimately realize its oneness. And Ramanuja is going to say, who's realizing it? If it was Brahman all along, then then there was no individual to realize anything in the first place. But let's bracket that. Ramanuja is going to say then that the soul is an eternal individual. The world is real, not in a superimposition. It's temporary. The forms are changing. In that sense, it's unreal. This tree behind me. It's going to dissolve one day into atoms and go into compost and then come up into, as prairie, as grass or something else. But the ingredients of the tree are eternal. They just recycle. He's going to say, sure, the world is temporary, but not unreal. Souls are eternal and individual. They never merge. Remain individual. I'm an individual now, responsible for my karma, and you are responsible for your karma. And then Brahman is a person. Now, how does he account for these two? Remember, your problem is you've got to make sense of the Upanishads. You've got to make them systematic. How does Ramanuja accomplish this? He says, the world is like God's body. Just like we have a soul in our body, and the soul controls the body, but the soul is distinct and in control of the body. So in that sort of way, God Narayana, Vishnu, is the supreme soul, supporting everything and controlling and sustaining and everything, and the world and the souls are like two aspects of his body. So the statements in the Upanishads that speak of God as impersonal are referring to the fact that he's not a person like a human person. He's, that he's not, his qualities are not material qualities. So that's how he accounts for it. So therefore, when the texts are speaking about the God as having no qualities, they're speaking about the world, not about God. When the texts speak about the Atman uniting with Brahman, they don't mean merging like drop of water into the ocean. They mean that it unites in love, like the intimate relationship between, like a husband and wife or something. Like, they're united, but they're still individuals. Or lover and beloved. And the world is real. So in other words, for him, so therefore he finds his way of accounting for the two different kinds of statements in the Upanishads. Some of them are referring to God, like the one we just read actually. It thought in the beginning, let me become many. Some of the statements are referring to the world, some are referring to the soul. So different statements are not referring necessarily to the same. It's all Brahman, but Brahman, the name of his philosophy is vishishtadvaita. Shankara's Advaita, non-dual. Ramanuja takes the Advaita, but he adds a term before it, vishishtadvaita. Advaita, non-dual. What does vishishta mean? Differentiated non-duality. What does that mean? That everything is Brahman, but there's differences in Brahman. What are the differences? Brahman is God, Brahman is world, material world, and Brahman is the souls. It's Advaita, it's all Brahman, but there are differences between these three types of things, these three categories of things. And therefore, so therefore when the Upanishads speak of Brahman in one way and then seem to be speaking about it in another passage in a different way, well, which Brahman are they referring to? Are they referring to God? For Ramanuja, are they referring to God or the soul or Prakriti? We have to know. When we understand which aspect of Brahman they're referring to, we see there's no contradiction. Remember, Vedantins, no contradiction. You have to find a way of interpreting the Upanishads, clarifying the Upanishads, systematizing the Upanishads, such as there's no contradictions, because that's what it means to be a Vedantin. Okay, Vedantin means you accept them as eternal revelation, just as a Christian accepts the Bible, Muslim accepts the Quran, and so forth. Buddhist accepts the words of the Buddha as non-negotiable, eternal truth. Even the Buddhists, they don't accept texts, but they accept the words of the, still words. Mimamsa and Vedanta words are in these texts or bodies, right? Because they wouldn't be written down; they would be oral. So they're actually words, but they're not books like we have. They are just oral utterances that are eternal. So the Buddhists don't accept that sort of type of revelation, but really they say accept basically the same thing, because it's the words of the Buddha. So all of Buddhist philosophy is still constrained, if you will. It still has to be fitted into what the Buddha said, what you think he said, but you're still acknowledging that as a philosopher might say it's a straitjacket. You're limited, your thought, you're limiting it because you're forcing it, or you're limiting it, perhaps is the best term. It has to somehow align itself, your philosophy, with pre-existing words. So you're not really letting human reason go freely. So that might be a sort of modern philosopher's point of view. And the Indian response to that would have been, well, philosophy without it will just go on eternally then. You never arrive at truths. One philosopher will just keep disagreeing with another. Eternal truths are beyond human reason, and therefore the only way they can be accessed is not through ever never-ending philosophical debate and engagement, right? Look at the history of Western philosophy, history of Indian philosophy, that matter. They would all say that no, for truth to be known, it has to come from a place beyond human reason, right? For the Buddhists, it's the Buddhist enlightenment, place beyond human reason. He went beyond reason to realize he was in a meditative state, not in a philosophizing state when he had his enlightenment experience. Vedantins would say it's, yeah, I would agree, you can also get it through your practice, but that practice is molded on the truths of the Upanishads. So in this sense, they would all say just philosophy for the sake of philosophizing is a waste of a human life. You may be proud that, oh, you don't restrict your truth, your philosophizing, you allow reason to go wherever it wants to go, but you just fritter away your life. You never become enlightened, and then what? And then what? At the moment of death, then what? If it's true that there's rebirth, then where are you going? If it's true that there is something beyond matter that gets reborn, then what has your philosophy done to help you in that moment? And what control will you have over your next birth? If there is rebirth, of course, which all these schools will argue there is. All right, so Ramanuja, are we clear? So the way he's systematizing it, Shankara has two tiers. Some statements in the Upanishad just referring to conventional reality, others ultimate, which is impersonal, only one, formless, qualityless, non-differentiated, no differences. Brahman, not even the Atman, is merged. Ramanuja, complete opposite. From the same text, they're coming up with completely different versions of reality and of the self and of the meaning of life. For Ramanuja, it's bhakti, devotion to God. For Shankara, it's knowledge. Even the very methods are different. Ramanuja, world is real, souls are real. Why are there different statements in the Upanishad? Because some are referring to the Atman, some are referring to the real Atman, some are referring to the real world, some are referring to real God, Brahman, who is a person. Okay, I think that's enough. But just to say, all Vedanta agrees then that Brahman is the source of everything, whether that Brahman is just one non-differentiated, or whether it's differentiated, vishishta, into the world and the souls, but they all agree that Brahman is the cause of reality, and they agree that the goal of life is to seek Brahman and to know Brahman. They all agree that the reason we can't immediately perceive Brahman is because of ignorance, avidya, okay, although Shankara understands avidya in one way, Ramanuja in another way, but they agree that there is avidya, and the Buddhists agree with that too. So there's plenty of commonality, but massive and major and substantial differences between their interpretation of the Vedanta text. So we'll have fun reading them. I hope you'll be enthused reading them later in the semester. Okay, so now that's it for Hamilton. I don't think we need to say anything about the last chapter. Hang on a second. I mean, the longevity of these traditions is amazing. They're all living traditions. Buddhism very much alive. It's right here in our Western, it's kind of cool to be Buddhist nowadays. So there are plenty of Buddhist meditation centers on our main streets and high streets, and plenty of yoga centers. And so this is, these are not just archaic. We're looking at the classical forms. Of course, in the course of time, they evolve. They all evolve. They're not static, and none of these schools are static. Even Shankara has later Advaita Vedantins, and then Neo-Advaita, and the theistic traditions. They have later versions. Perhaps you've met the Hare Krishnas, so that would be a sort of later modern version, kind of not exactly an offshoot of Ramanuja's lineage, but in that sort of line. So these are so we're not just looking at some archaic, dead, just intellectual traditions, where these are alive and well, just as Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, of course, and various schools of Buddhism. All right, so I think that's it. And Hamilton was very fast and furious, and she threw out a lot of stuff at us, but we just wanted a bird's eye view, and now we can go in, hopefully a little bit deeper into some of these traditions.